All right. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Raina Factor. I'm a postdoctoral clinical fellow at UCLA. I'm working at the Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior. I currently have involvement in the CAN Clinic and the Peers Clinic. And I have the honor of working with Dr. Elizabeth Laugeson and introducing her today. So I know people are trickling in, but just for the sake of time, I'll get started. So Dr. Laugeson is an associate an associate clinical professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences at the UCLA Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior, and is a licensed clinical psychologist. She's also the founder and director of the UCLA Peers Clinic, which is an outpatient hospital-based program which provides parent-assisted social skills training for individuals with autism spectrum disorder and other social impairments from preschool to adulthood, which we'll be talking about today. She is also the training director for the UCLA Tarjan Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities and program director for dissemination, outreach, and education at the very prestigious UCLA Autism Center of Excellence. As the developer of Peers, Dr. Laugeson has trained thousands of mental health professionals, educators, and families worldwide, and is dedicated to developing and testing evidence-based treatments to improve social skills across the lifespan and also across the globe. As one of the only empirically supported and intentionally and internationally recognized social skills programs for youth with autism and other social challenges. Her program is currently used in over 85 countries and has been translated into over a dozen languages. In addition to her amazing accolades and accomplishments, I'm honored to work with Dr. Laugeson and have her as a postdoctoral mentor. I'm very excited for her to share her wonderful and impactful work with all of you. I will also be monitoring the Q&A session with questions. So if you have any questions, you can type them in the Q&A, which is located at the bottom of your screen in the toolbar. So with that, Dr. Laugeson, I will hand it over to you to present on promoting social engagement for youth during COVID-19 through the UCLA Peers Program.
All right, well, thank you so much to Raina for that nice introduction, and thanks to Dr. McCracken for the nice invitation to present here at Child Grand Rounds, and also to Ernie and Rima for organizing this event. So thank you all for being here. As Raina mentioned, today I'm going to be sharing a little bit about how to promote social engagement during COVID-19. I know that we talk a lot about social distancing or physical distancing in our daily lives, but that doesn't necessarily equate to a desire for social disengagement. And so we'll talk about ways that you can promote social engagement for young people during this unusual time that we're all living through. In terms of what I'd like to just begin with is just, of course, disclosing any kind of conflicts of interest potentially. I do receive book royalties from Taylor and Francis and from Wiley, and I do receive grant funding from Autism Speaks and NIH. Hopefully that won't have any impact on what I'm sharing with you today, but just wanted to begin with that statement. In terms of the lecture this morning, I wanted to begin with talking about what are some of the social deficits that we often see among young people, particularly socially neglected versus peer rejected youth. From there, I'll talk about the importance of improving friendships, which is one of the areas that we target in our own social skills interventions at UCLA. We'll talk about the consequences of peer rejection. I'll give a brief overview of the curriculum that we've developed known as Peers, and I'll give you even some of the intervention strategies that we're currently using to promote social engagement during this pandemic. I'll give you a very brief overview of some of our preliminary research findings for telehealth, and then I'll leave you with some resources. And as Raina mentioned, if you have questions throughout the lecture, feel free to send them through the Q&A, and we'll save some time at the end for those questions. All right, so when it comes to social skills training, regardless of which populations you're sort of working with, we work with a lot of youth with autism spectrum disorder, kids and adults with ADHD, depression, anxiety, all kinds of presenting issues. But regardless of those diagnoses, you typically will see two types of young people that will present for social skills training, and they tend to either be peer rejected or socially neglected. So let's talk about the differences really quickly, because this will impact sort of how we teach social skills. Now, in terms of the peer rejected youth, these are the ones who are actively seeking out their peers, but they're actively getting pushed away. They're doing something that other people don't like. Maybe they're barging into conversations, or they're off topic. They're talking about, the same thing over and over. Maybe they're trying to be a funny joke teller, but they're doing something that other people don't like, and they're getting pushed away. And they often get teased, they often get bullied, and they frequently have bad reputations with their peers. We also have this other group, though, of young people that are more socially neglected, and they look quite different. So these are the young people that are not even trying to socially engage their peers. They're often seen as shy or timid. They go unnoticed, essentially, by their peers. And, regardless of whether or not you can see these kids in their social milieu, you can pretty reliably predict if a kid is peer rejected or socially neglected based on the diagnoses that they often have. So, for example, who's more likely to barge into conversations and be off topic and talk about whatever they want to, maybe try to be a funny joke teller? Probably the peer rejected kids, and they're more likely to have things like ADHD, impulse control issues, and often they might also carry a diagnosis of autism. Now, the socially neglected, remember, these are the ones that aren't even trying. So who's more likely to do that? Well, maybe the anxious and the depressed kids, the kids who kind of go unnoticed. That's more likely to be resulting in some type of social neglect. And again, they could also possibly have autism. So we're going to come back to these terms throughout this presentation, talking about peer rejected versus socially neglected. The good news about both of these groups is that regardless of whether a kid is socially neglected or peer rejected, the skills that you should be teaching will be the same, because you just want to teach good social skills. And it doesn't matter if you're socially neglected or peer rejected, the skills will be the same. However, what they struggle with will be slightly different based on the peer rejection or social neglect. All right, so what are the consequences of these types of rejection? Well, during adolescence in particular, this is one of the strongest predictors of mental health problems later in life. Rejection often results in things like depression and anxiety. If you want to predict who's going to be depressed and anxious later in life, go into any typical middle school or high school and look for the kids who are being rejected, and that will be one of the strongest predictors of things like depression and anxiety. We also know things like loneliness and low self-esteem, very much related to peer rejection, substance abuse, poor academic performance, possibly early withdrawal from school, and even at its worst, suicidal ideation and suicide attempts are strongly predicted by things like peer rejection. Now, the reality is that it's not just, we're kind of known in our program in peers for working with a lot of kids in the autism spectrum, but it's not just kids on the spectrum that struggle socially. Even though we often link that sort of, that issue with that population of kids, there are a lot of kids who are actually struggling socially, regardless of their diagnosis. And this is just some aggregate kind of data that's been done across North America, looking at peer sociometrics. And so in these studies, what they'll do is they'll go into schools and they'll have kids identify who they like and who they don't like, who they're friends with, or, and also, who they hang out with. And they get these different categories of peer acceptance. And what they found in this research is that about half of kids, maybe 55% of kids, are in the average range of peer acceptance. They have some friends, they're doing okay socially, and they're not particularly popular, but they're doing all right. Then you have another maybe 15 to 17% of kids that are peer rejected, or rather, 15 to 70% of kids who are popular. So these are the kids who aren't necessarily well liked, but they're well known. Okay, so you can also get very controversial kids in that category, kids who are maybe even bullies or gossips. Then you have another 15% of kids who are peer rejected. These are the ones who are actively seeking out their peers, but they're actively getting pushed away. And then on top of that, you have another 15% roughly of kids who are socially neglected. They're going unnoticed. And what this data tells you, again, sort of in aggregate, is that in any typical middle school or high school across North America, about 1/3 of kids are struggling socially. And I would argue that we're not really doing enough for those kids. And, they haven't done estimates recently with COVID, but I'm imagining that these numbers might even be going up some regardless of what's happening, diagnostically. So why would we target friendships? I mean, in the peers program, we often focus on making and keeping friends, also handling conflict and rejection, but why would those be important areas to target in social skills training? Well, what we've known for decades is that just having one or two close friends is very predictive of adjustment in life and actually can buffer the impact of stressful life events. Think about that. When you have a bad day, who do you reach out to? Maybe you reach out to a friend, and makes you feel a little bit better. Imagine if you didn't have anyone to reach out to, how that would impact you. We also know just having one or two close friends really correlates positively with things like self-esteem and independence. You feel better about yourself if you have a couple of close friends, and you're more likely to be independent. And then we also know that having one or two close friends is negatively correlated with things like depression and anxiety, right? You're less likely to be depressed and anxious if you just have a couple of close friends. So it's actually a different approach to dealing with mental health issues like anxiety and depression, is build up those social supports. So just to give you a quick background about our program, if you're unfamiliar. So PEERS, it's an acronym. It stands for the Program for the Education and Enrichment of Relational Skills. It was initially developed at UCLA in 2004. And it was initially, we started it as a program for adolescents on the autism spectrum. Since then, it's expanded to school-based interventions. We have interventions for adults, even preschoolers. And it's not just for youth with autism spectrum disorder. As I mentioned earlier, we work with many different youth that are struggling socially. Now, since its development in 2004, the program, as Raina mentioned, is in over 85 countries. It's been translated into over a dozen languages, and we're constantly developing new programs and testing our current programs as well. And so you'll see that we also have some research programs I'll tell you about a little bit later related to college to career transition, related to dating as well for adults on the spectrum. What makes the program unique from other programs is that we're only teaching ecologically valid social skills. So not what adults think that kids should do in social situations, but what socially successful kids are naturally doing. That's what we're teaching. It's also unique in that our programs are parent assisted or caregiver assisted. So we include social coaches in their lives that can provide social coaching outside of the treatment setting. It's often parents. It could sometimes be other family members, job coaches, life coaches, maybe peer mentors. This is one of the only evidence-based social skills programs. That's probably the most unique aspect of PEERS, is that there's a lot of evidence that shows that this program is effective. And it's been cross-culturally validated across the globe. So all those different countries that I mentioned, they are using programs that are currently actively being researched or have been researched quite extensively. All right, so what kind of skills do we teach in this program? Well, we kind of break it down to friendship and romantic relationship skills, and then we also teach skills related to managing conflict and rejection. So related to friendships and romantic relationships, it would be things like finding and choosing appropriate friends or romantic partners. Conversational skills, what we call peer entry and exiting skills. So going up to people and starting conversations or entering group conversations, assessing interest, knowing how to exit conversations. We also talk about things like electronic communication, appropriate use of humor. We teach them about, having get-togethers with friends and being good sports. And we also have sessions on dating etiquette in our young adult program. Related to conflict and rejection, the skills we teach there related to dating etiquette would be things like, taking no for an answer or turning someone down politely, handling dating pressure from a partner. And we also talk about things like handling arguments and disagreements, changing a bad reputation, and handling all the different forms of bullying, things like teasing or physical bullying, cyberbullying, rumors, and gossip. So that's sort of an overview of the skills that we teach. But I wanted to kind of focus on a few particularly important skills that are really important to enhancing and promoting social engagement during COVID-19. And we've been running groups, just, FYI, in the Peers Clinic since mid-March over telehealth using Zoom. And so we've learned a lot over these many months about how to help to promote these types of social engagement. And we want to share with you some of the skills that we are currently using. Now, finding a source of friends during COVID-19, that's going to be challenging. So we need to talk about that. Also, when you maybe join, let's say, meetup groups or online groups to maybe find a potential source of friends, which is what we're going to be recommending, how do you start conversations with people there? How do you enter group conversations with people in these settings online? And then also, how do you get together with friends and hang out with friends during COVID-19 if you're forced into this physical or social distancing? What does that look like in a pandemic? So those are sort of the skills that we're going to share with you today, and then I'll get a little bit more specific with each one of them. So in terms of finding and choosing friends, first thing we need to know is that friendships are really based on common interests. Right? Think about that. Think about who you're friends with or have been friends with. You have things in common. And those are the things that you talk about with your friends. Those are the things that you do with your friends. And so people often affiliate with specific groups of people, peer groups or crowds, kind of based on their interests. And these peer groups or crowds are important because they give us a potential source of friends with common interests. It's not a guarantee, but it's a potential pool of people that you might be able to be friends with. They also protect us from individual bullying. A lot of people don't think about that, but who do bullies want to pick on? They want to pick on the kid who's alone, not a kid that's in a group, essentially. So it's also helpful for that reason. So a good question to think about then at this point are, what are some of the different peer groups or crowds that exist in a typical middle school or high school? This is still going to be relevant even during a pandemic. So what are some of those groups? Well, these are some of the groups that have been identified over the years. It's not an exhaustive list. There are others, but you've got like the jocks and the athletes, right? You've got the gamers and the techies, and you've got the sci-fi geeks and the artists and the musicians and all these different groups of kids, and they all congregate around these shared interests. And again, the great thing about these peer groups is that it gives you that pool of people that you have common interests with that might potentially be friends. And this is just naturally how socially successful kids sort of congregate and also find their friends. And sometimes there's overlap between the groups, right? A lot of science geeks, for example, might also be into things like robotics or sci-fi. A lot of gamers might also be techies, and there can be overlap certainly in these groups, but these groups are all based on shared interest, essentially. All right, so how do you find a source of friends like this during a pandemic? And also, how can you tell which group someone is in, whether it's in person, pre-COVID-19 or post-COVID-19, or currently in this unusual situation that we're all living through? Well, in person, you can often tell which group someone's in kind of based on their appearance, right? What kind of clothing they're wearing, how they're dressed, their general appearance, maybe what they're carrying around with them, what they're doing, what they're talking about, and also where they are. So how could you identify, for example, a gamer? Well, probably carrying on little gaming devices, right? Maybe talking about video games, maybe playing video games, probably have little gaming logos on their t-shirts. Maybe they join a gaming club at school. We have to decode the social world for our young people so that they can sort of figure out where to find these potential sources of friends. Now, during COVID-19, this is going to be less obvious in terms of appearance and clothing and things like that, but maybe where they're located, what they're doing and where they're at. So in other words, a lot of kids right now are joining online extracurricular activities, and they're joining online meetup groups, and they're usually based on whatever these interests are. So the location of where these people will be a critical ingredient to actually finding a source of friends during COVID-19. All right, so where can you find actually some of these people in terms of these different peer groups? Well, we know in reality, most young people will join extracurriculars, as I just mentioned, social activities, right? Meetup groups. There might be school clubs, for example. For adults, maybe there's work clubs. There could be clubs that are in the community, whether you're a teen or a child, a young adult. There are community-based clubs that people join. There's sports leagues. There's even at work and school, people, of course, will find friends. Volunteer programs. If you're into pets, maybe you volunteer at a pet shelter or something like that. And then, of course, there's meetup groups. Now, some of you might be familiar with meetup.com, which I'll talk about in a moment. And that's very common for adults to use. But there's also been a lot of meetup groups recently for adolescents as well. And online meetup groups are kind of where it's at right now for people socializing during COVID-19. And so, for example, where will you actually find them? Like, what are the websites? Where could you actually locate meetup groups during this pandemic? Well, for adolescents, there's a lot. You could simply do like a Google search and find, potentially online meetup groups. But one that's really been vetted that a lot of our families are currently using is called OutSchool. And if you're not familiar with OutSchool, it provides online groups for kids K through 12, so it covers a wide range of ages. And they have traditional subjects, like they'll have things like math and language arts and writing, and that's, I think, what often people associate them with, but they have other groups too. So they'll have pop culture groups, things like Dungeons and Dragons, maybe Stranger Things or Wings of Fire, things that are kind of popular. They'll have STEM classes, right? So things like coding and engineering, physics, video games, even they'll have gaming clubs. And they also have enrichment activities. So things like music and dance, art, yoga, cooking, meditation even. These are courses that people have to sign up for and pay for. So there's that element of this. There are, of course, free online courses as well, but this is a very common website that families are using right now to help their kids find a potential source of friends and get socially engaged during COVID-19. Now, for adults, a lot of adults, even prior to this pandemic, were using this website and an app called meetup.com. And meetup.com, it's an international, website. It's used all over the globe by adults. It's not really appropriate necessarily for, teens and younger children. They do have meetups for parents to have play dates and things like that with much younger children. But in general, it's for adults. And they did have in-person groups and probably still do. For adults, but they also now have a lot of online groups that people are using during COVID-19. So the groups are recreational. They're based on common interests, and they're regional. So you could just sort of put in your address in a certain mile radius that you're willing to go. You could click on a few, categories of interest, and all these different meetup groups will pop up. And so again, they tend to be recreational. So there's a lot of things like movie meetups and maybe gaming meetups, anime meetups. There might be things for sports fans, and alumni groups are pretty popular. And then also things like cosplay groups and LARPing groups and things like that. If you don't know what that is, cosplay is costume play. It's sort of getting dressed in an anime character, maybe acting out the persona. It's very common at things like Comic-Con. And LARPing is live action role playing, which is sort of meeting in parks and open spaces and acting out scenes of things, but you're in costume. And so these are very popular activities for a lot of young people, and they actually find each other through this website called meetup.com. So these are just a couple of examples of places where you might go to find a source of friends. But now imagine that you send your kid to one of these places, they go to these really cool meetup groups online, but how are they going to talk to people? That's sort of the next step, the next phase of all of this. So here's an interesting question. Think about what most young people are told to do to meet new people. Like, imagine they go to a new meetup group, or whether it's in person or online, and what are they told to do? Well, they're usually told to go up and say hi, or go up and introduce themselves. And, I ask every group of kids that question, and they always say the same thing. They're told to say hi and introduce themselves. But think about what that would look like. Imagine that I just walk up to you and I say, hi, I'm Liz, right? What would you think of me if I did that? You would think I'm weird. That's a weird thing to do. So it's not actually ecologically valid, even though kids are often given that advice. So in Peers, if you know anything about our program, we do a lot of role plays in our program, and we do both good examples and also bad examples. Bad examples are probably just as important as the good example. And so think about this. How would you, what would be a common social error that maybe a peer rejected person might do to start a conversation? with just an individual person, they might walk up and just start talking about whatever they want to talk about with very little regard for whether or not that's interesting to the other person. That's maybe what a peer rejected person might do. What about that socially neglected person? What might they do? Probably nothing, right? They probably won't even try. They maybe want people to come over to them, but they maybe don't initiate conversations with people. So this role play I'm about to show you is more of an example of what a peer rejected person might do. So you're going to see a person that walks into the screen in just a moment. Her name is Alina, and I want you to watch this role play and think about what Alina is doing wrong in starting this individual conversation.
Hey, do you ever go roller skating? What? Do you go roller skating? No. Why not? You should go. Okay. It's really fun. I go like every weekend. Sweet. There's this new skate park that just opened up. I'm trying to watch something right now, so. Oh, well, I'm just saying. It's really fun. They have like a student night every Thursday. Cool. You should definitely go. Okay.
Okay, so we would time out. We'd ask what Alina did wrong. And she just walked up and started randomly talking about roller skating. And, there's no context for talking about that. They're not in a roller skating rink, right? The person that she was talking to wasn't carrying roller skates or on roller skates. She didn't have a roller skate on her t-shirt or something. There's no context. So what was that like for that other person? Maybe kind of random, sort of annoying, right? What did she think of Alina? She's kind of weird, kind of obnoxious. And would she want to talk to her again? Definitely not. So this is not how we meet new people. All right, well, so what should we do? Well, instead, this is probably what most of you naturally do in social situations to start conversations with people. You probably just didn't think about it. So first thing is you kind of casually look over at the person, but you don't want to look like you're staring at them, right? That's sort of creepy. So you use a prop. Maybe you use your phone or some reading material, just something to look sort of distracted. And then what you're trying to do as you're casually looking over is you're trying to find a common interest. Remember, friendships are based on common interest. And so in that case, in that video, the person that you saw there on her phone, that was Jordan. And Jordan was watching a music video on her iPhone. So what could be a common interest? Maybe the music she was listening to or the artist that she was listening to, maybe her phone, the app that she's watching the music video on. These are all potential common interests. So if you find this common interest, you're going to mention it, all right? You can either make a comment, you could ask a question, or you could give a compliment. So a comment in that situation would be like, oh, that's the new such and such video. A question could be, oh, is that the new such and such video? And a compliment would be, oh, I love that song, or something like that. Then, of course, you need to sort of trade information back and forth. And this is the term that we use that describes a whole series of rules about having a two-way kind of reciprocal conversation. We also need to be assessing the person's interest. And this is sort of fascinating when you ask people, how can you tell if somebody wants to talk to you? Most people will say that it's a feeling that you get. But in reality, there are concrete behaviors that you're picking up on that give you the feeling. So how can you tell if somebody wants to talk to you in person? Well, they're looking at you, right? They're sort of facing you, not giving you the cold shoulder, and also talking to you. These are the three behavioral signs in person that people want to talk to us. And then, of course, if things are going well and we've never met them, then we can introduce ourselves. That's sort of an optional thing. But the introductions, they're optional. And if they happen, they come later in the conversation. So now that we've established sort of the good rules for in-person starting individual conversations, of course, we want to show a role play. So this is sort of the formula that we're following in teaching good social skills. So watch this role play and think about what Alina's doing right this time in starting this individual conversation.
Oh my God, I love that song. Yeah, me too. This is the new video that just came out today. No way. I'm dying to see that. Yeah, it's so good. That's awesome. Have you ever seen her in concert? I have. I actually have tickets for her upcoming concert. No way. The one that's coming up in 2 weeks? Yeah, it's going to be so great. That's so cool. Have you ever seen her perform? No, I wish. I really want to. Oh my gosh, she's amazing in concert. You need to see her. Yeah, that's what I've heard. Mm-hmm. By the way, I'm Alina. I'm Jordan. Nice to meet you.
Okay, so then we would time out, we'd ask which steps Alina followed, and then we'd be doing some perspective taking. All right. So what about doing these types of behaviors online? What does that look like? I mean, of course, we want to teach them how to interact with people in person, assuming we're all going to be back in person sometime, hopefully soon. Either way, we also need to teach them in the meantime how to start conversations online. And the steps are rather similar. You still are casually looking over at the person, or you're kind of noticing them, right? You're in some sort of a room, like a virtual room. So you're kind of like noticing them. You're still trying to find a common interest, and you're still going to mention the common interest, right? You still follow those general steps. You need to trade information. You also need to assess their interest, which is sort of similar. I mean, they're focusing their attention on you. They're sort of looking and towards you and towards the camera. They're not turned away and they're talking to you. These are still the behavioral signs. And if things are going well and you've never met before, you're still going to introduce yourself. Basically, the biggest difference is that we're not really having to use a prop at this point. There's no need for a prop when you're sort of starting a conversation with someone online, but the steps are rather similar. Now, the other thing we have to talk about is, let's say we're sending kids to these meetup groups online, and again, they're interacting with people. They may actually have to join a group conversation because, of course, these are groups that we're going to. And so what would that look like? And also, what would be the social errors associated with that? So if you're thinking about a peer rejected young person, what mistake might they make for joining an ongoing sort of group conversation? Well, they'll probably barge in. They might be off topic. They might talk about whatever they want to. They might change the topic, right? They also might not notice that they're not being accepted and kind of persist. And what about those socially neglected kids? What might they do? They probably won't do anything. They probably won't even try to join. And they might want people, again, to come and talk to them, but their body language isn't always that inviting, right? Where are they usually looking? Kind of looking down at the floor, maybe at their shoes, and it's not really inviting to other people. So this will be more an example of what a peer rejected person might do. And again, this is in person, so watch this role play. Think about what Alina's doing wrong this time in joining a group conversation.
Hey Jordan, you'll never guess. I saw Gabe at my favorite sushi restaurant this weekend.
No way, what restaurant was it?
Just the one right around the corner.
Oh, I've been meaning to try that place.
Yeah,
it's so close by. I felt bad that I'd never gone, but I went and it was so good.
Nice. What did you guys get?
I got the spicy tuna with crispy rice.
Yeah, it looked awesome.
Have you guys ever been roller skating?
Sorry, I just got the regular salmon.
There's this new skate park that just opened up.
It's really fun.
What did you get?
Just the salmon roll. It was plain.
They have
so
a Thursday night student night. A lot of people go to it. I've been meaning to go there. I really wanted to try it out. It's really, really fun. There's also this other place by the beach that I've been roller skating. I'm sorry, what?
What would you get if you went?
It's really cool. It's like right by the water and lots of people go.
All right, so we would time out and we would ask what Alina did wrong there. And of course she barged in just as we predicted, right? She was off topic. They were talking about sushi. She was talking about roller skating. I also like to ask our kids, did it seem like the group wanted to talk to her? And of course the answer is no, but then you want to follow up with, well, how could you tell? Well, they weren't looking at her, right? They weren't facing her. They weren't talking to her. They kind of closed the circle. I don't know if you noticed that in groups of people, they kind of talk in a circle. What do they do with the circle when they want to talk to you? They sort of open the circle. What do they do if they don't want to talk to you? They close the circle. And they definitely did that. They gave her the cold shoulder. So then you would want to do some perspective taking. What was that like for the group? Really annoying, really maybe kind of confusing. What do they think of Alina? She's weird, right? She's kind of obnoxious and annoying, kind of intrusive. And would they want to talk to her again? No, in fact, kids get bad reputations for doing things like this. So instead, we want to teach the steps that you all sort of naturally follow when you're successfully joining group conversations. And again, this is probably one of those skills that you all naturally use, but you maybe didn't realize it. So the first step is that you're kind of listening to the conversation, right? And sort of watching from a distance. You're essentially eavesdropping, but you don't want to look like you're eavesdropping. So once again, you use a prop to sort of look distracted. Most people will use a phone. Again, it could be things like a gaming device or reading material, but the prop sort of needs to make sense. So you look distracted by it. And really what you're trying to do as you're eavesdropping is you're trying to identify the topic. You're trying to figure out what they're talking about and also make sure that you know something about the topic. You shouldn't be trying to join conversations where you really don't know much about the topic. If you decide to join, of course, you don't want to yell from across the room. So you usually move a little bit closer, What's an appropriate distance? Probably no closer than about an arm's length away. You'll also want to wait for something. You don't want to barge into the conversation, so you wait for this little pause. There's never a perfect pause, right? But you just want to not interrupt too much. Usually best time to join is when one person stops talking and another person is starting to talk. And then again, you're going to mention the topic, right? You're going to mention the common interest. So you can either make a comment, you can ask a question, you can give a compliment, but it's on topic. And then right away, you have to start assessing their interest. Are they looking at you? Are they facing you? Are they talking to you? Did they open the circle? And if things are going well, they seem interested, after a little while, then you can introduce yourself. But once again, if there are going to be introductions, they come later. So now I want to show what this is supposed to look like. And again, we always start this lesson with thinking about the in-person social skills, then we'll get to the online social skills. All right, so watch this role play. Think about what Alina's doing right this time in joining this group conversation.
So Jordan, you'll never guess I saw Gabe at my favorite sushi restaurant this weekend.
Nice. What restaurant was it?
Just the one right around the corner.
Oh, I've been meaning to check that place out.
Yeah, it's so close by and I'd never gone, but I went. It was really good.
Oh, what did you guys get?
I got a spicy tuna roll and I loved it.
Yeah.
You got the spicy tuna roll? That's what I always get.
Yeah, how good is it?
It's so good there. Have you guys tried the rainbow roll there?
I haven't. No, I actually got the salmon roll.
Oh, okay. That's good too, but
Yeah.
the rainbow rolls is their specialty.
I'll try it.
Yeah.
If you were gonna go, what'd you get?
I look at the California roll. It's my favorite.
I tried that one there actually. It's really good.
Nice.
Okay, so we would time out that role play. We'd say, what did Alina do right? We'd go through all the steps that she just followed. I also like to ask, did it seem like the group wanted to talk to her? They'll say yes. You'll ask, how could you tell? And then do some perspective taking. So what was that like for the group this time? It was fine. It was enjoyable. Right, what did they think of Alina this time? She seems nice. She's friendly. And would they want to talk to her again? Yes. Now, this is how we meet new people, right? By starting conversations, by joining group conversations, regardless of whether it's happening in person or online. Now, that probably, by the way, looked like a lot of steps. And it is, it's 10 steps. That looks like a lot. But in reality, if you really want to simplify this, I mean, there's essentially 5 steps, right? You're watching and listening. That's the first step. There's a lot of sub-steps in there, right? You're using a prop, you're identifying the topic, finding some common interest, but that's essentially the first step. Second step is you're moving a little bit closer. Third is that you're waiting for that little pause. Fourth step is to mention the topic. And then the fifth is maybe optionally, you might introduce yourself. So if it feels like a lot of steps, you can simplify this. It's just important that we talk about those sub-steps as well. So what does this look like online in a pandemic when you can't necessarily join group conversations in person? Well, it's still pretty similar for joining group conversations online. Let's say we have kids that are going to meetup groups online. How might they talk with people? How might they join conversations with people? You're still watching and sort of listening. You don't need a prop though, because again, you're sort of online, but you are still identifying the topic and you're trying to find some common interest. There's no moving closer. You're not going to move closer to the screen, right? That's not really necessary. You're just there already, but you will still wait for a pause in the conversation. You're going to mention the topic just in the ways that we described before. And if you haven't met before and it seems appropriate, you could always introduce yourself. So still very similar in theory, but slightly different because of the context. They're now online. Okay, so now let's say that we've been going to these meetup groups online. We're starting to develop friendships with people online. We've been starting conversations and entering conversations and it's going well. Well, how do you develop close, meaningful friendships? Well, in general, the way that we all develop close, meaningful friendships is by hanging out with our friends, getting together with them outside of maybe school or work or wherever we happen to know them. In this case, maybe a meetup group. So get-togethers are very important to developing close, meaningful friendships. But how do you do that in a pandemic? That's where it starts to get complicated. Well, a lot of kids are still having online get-togethers with their friends, even during COVID-19. And these are some of the platforms that kids are using for having online get-togethers with their friends. They'll use things like FaceTime or Google Hangouts, maybe House Party, Netflix Party, Skype, and Zoom. They use WhatsApp and Discord often to just kind of communicate with groups of people, and they can do video chats and things like that, or text over social media, as well as even using gaming websites. Now, some of these websites and some of these apps will be familiar to you, and some of you, these might not be so familiar. So I'm going to quickly go through sort of the differences. And I think that most of us know what FaceTime is, but FaceTime is sort of a video messaging video chat feature that is on iOS devices, Apple devices like iPhones and iPads and Apple computers. And what some people might not know about FaceTime is that you can actually FaceTime now with up to 32 people. So a lot of kids and young people are using FaceTime to hang out with their friends and have get-togethers. And sometimes it's a one-on-one get-together, sometimes it's a group get-together, but it does have the option of up to 32 people. Google Hangouts is also very popular with a lot of young people. And so Google Hangouts, you can do things like texting and kind of having conversations back and forth between individual people or groups of people. Video calls are kind of the main thing, though, that people do. And often in Google Hangouts, it will be often large groups of friends. They can also share videos and photos and things like that over Google Hangouts. But this is a very popular venue for a lot of people to hang out with their friends. House Party has also become incredibly popular during COVID-19. I think it was around before this pandemic, but it really got quite popular with COVID-19. And it's very similar to Google Hangouts, where you can hang out with people online. But what's sort of different is it has lots of game features. And so if kids are into tabletop board games or card games, they have things like Uno that you can play with everybody. You can do karaoke groups, and they have lots of different games, and they keep it kind of fun and interactive. And it can be just one-on-one again, or often it's a group of people. Netflix parties have become very popular as well. So this is where you're watching, your favorite Netflix show or series, maybe it's a movie, and you can watch this with other people by using this extension, and then you can chat with people during the movie. So that's sort of been a fun way that people are interacting with their friends, particularly during this pandemic. I think we all know what Skype is, but some people still use Skype, not just FaceTime or Google Hangouts. And this is, again, it could be a messaging back and forth through text. It could be video chatting is probably the most common form, but Skype is also still around. Zoom we're all using right now. So this is very common for work settings, but actually kids will use this as well, even young adults, not just for conferencing and doing video meetings, but they also use this for things like if they want to work out together, for example, they might share their screen and do a workout video, or they might even watch a show through Zoom, and then they can actually see each other and talk at the same time. So it's a little bit different than maybe Netflix party. Additionally, WhatsApp is very, very common. It's been around for a long time. It's a messaging system. It's an app that you can download, and people do group chats or they do one-on-one chats. It's very easy to send photos and videos over this, and you can also do video chats through WhatsApp. So very common use of actually messaging systems. And then kind of similar to that is Discord. And Discord's become very popular recently. And again, it's a way that you can kind of do voice and text chats. You can do video chats, and people do this one-on-one or also in groups. So let's say we use one of these platforms to interact with our friends, to have get-togethers. What about the activity? What do we do? Well, a lot of kids really do have activity-based get-togethers, even during COVID-19. I mean, you could just sort of hang out and talk, and that's certainly an option, but a lot of kids are actually choosing to do more activity-based get-togethers. So for example, if the common interest is movies and TV shows, maybe they do like a Netflix viewing party. If they're into art, maybe some kids are playing like Pictionary and things like that online. You can do that over Zoom. Anime, if they're into that, maybe they watch anime online. If they're into food, people make meals together. That's also a common dating activity too, is making meals together. If they're into sports, maybe watching some sports together online is another thing that people will do. Video games, of course, that's pretty easy, right? Just playing online video games. Fitness, like I mentioned before, people will do like a YouTube workout video together, maybe over Zoom or some other platform. For books, if that's their interest, maybe they create an online book club. Tabletop board games, I mentioned House Party has lots of games. People can play games when they're getting together with their friends online. And if they're into STEM, maybe they take an out-school class. They meet other people that are into science, technology, engineering, mathematics. So those are some ideas of activity-based get-togethers, even during a pandemic. In terms of just thinking of other activities, I did want to share with you these slides that I'm going over are going to be available to everyone. We've been creating this Google Doc since the beginning of the pandemic that really has all these different ideas that our team has come up with, but also our families that have gone through our program. We've gone through a few cohorts now in both our teen and our young adult program, and have learned a lot through this pandemic about how to stay socially connected. And so we've started to develop this Google Doc that provides all these ideas of not only meetup groups and social activities that people could be joining, but also ideas of get-togethers. And so everyone can have access to that. We're just making that open to the public. In terms of just the outcomes, so as I mentioned, PEERS is one of the only evidence-based social skills programs in existence, and so I don't have time to share with you all of our evidence, but I did want to alert you to these are some of the papers that have been published on PEERS within the US, and then also outside of the US, we have a growing research data that you can take a look at. If you go to our website, you can locate a lot of these papers. But I did want to share with you some of the preliminary outcomes of our telehealth groups. Now, this is a pilot study that was done by Christopher Miyake at CARD, the Center for Autism and Related Disabilities, years ago, prior to this pandemic, just looking at the outcomes for their telehealth or remote groups, but also comparing that to in-person groups. And this, again, was a small pilot study. But what they found here was this light blue color, this is sort of the different scores from pre to post test in problem behaviors on the social skills improvement system in telehealth. But the green here bar, this is in-person outcomes for things like problem behaviors and the change in scores from pre to post test. And you'll notice that they're actually pretty equivalent from telehealth to in-person. Likewise, when you use the social skills improvement system to look at overall social skills, this is the telehealth outcomes, and this is the in-person. And again, they're pretty equivalent. There's no statistically significant difference there. And they also use the social responsiveness scale, the SRS, to look at changes and outcomes there from pre to post test. And again, this is telehealth here in light blue. The green represents in-person. And again, we're seeing that the outcomes are equivalent, whether it's in person or done remotely. And what this very first, pilot study of PEERS via telehealth tells us is that the treatment delivery may be as effective, at least for treating youth with autism spectrum disorder. That was the population studied in this particular study. And while this is a very promising form of delivery of treatment, there could be some limitations based on access to technology for certain families. So we have to acknowledge that. And also there's, of course, additional research that's needed. This was a very small pilot study, but it was the first study to be done looking at telehealth. And again, it was pre-COVID-19. Now, since COVID-19, I mentioned that we've been able to remove all of our telehealth groups or all of our treatment groups to telehealth, with the exception of PEERS for preschoolers, which we're hoping to resurrect this fall. But all of our teen and young adult groups have been moved to telehealth, and we've actually been able to collect data on these groups. And so I have a few, this is hot off the presses, this first time I've ever presented this data. We're very excited, and I want to really thank Jasper Estebillo, Laura Attery, Christine Moody, for Elizabeth Dunluck for their help in putting together this data so quickly. But at any rate, this is looking at the comparison of telehealth to in-person delivery. And this is looking at, in particular, social engagement. Now, the blue here represents the in-person groups, and the black here represents the telehealth. Now, this is looking at social engagement in terms of the number of get-togethers in the previous month, according to parents for their teens. These are teens that are going through our program. And you'll notice that we actually saw significant improvements in overall total number of get-togethers in the previous month in both the in-person group and also in the telehealth group. And these numbers, even though they could look a little bit different because the telehealth actually shows higher numbers, these actually are not statistically significantly different. So they're actually equivalent. This, again, was a very small study, but at any rate, it's showing us that actually they are doing quite well, even in telehealth. These numbers over here are looking at the number of hosted get-togethers, meaning that the teen organized the get-togethers in the previous month, and this is the number of invited get-togethers. And these were not statistically significant. It was the total number that were. But again, not different from one another. It looks like telehealth is actually just as good as in person. We look at adolescent report here, and we're seeing something similar. So the blue here again is in person, the black is telehealth, and they're both statistically significantly higher from pre to post test. But they're not different from each other. They are equivalent. Telehealth and in-person seems to be equivalent in terms of the total number of get-togethers. And again, these other graphs represent sort of the number of hosted get-togethers versus invited get-togethers where someone invited them on a get-together in the previous month. If we look at things like social skills knowledge, again, both groups are improving, both in-person and telehealth, but they're not statistically significantly different from each other. So again, telehealth seems to be kind of keeping up and at pace with in-person. Overall, social skills was not statistically significant in telehealth. Now, this is a very small sample, so we are definitely underpowered. When we look at things like effect sizes, they actually are quite comparable. And so when we look at, is there a significant difference between overall social skills between the two groups, even though visually that might look like there actually isn't a statistical significant difference between these two groups. So definitely more research is needed here in terms of overall social skills as reported on the social skills improvement system. Looking at problem behaviors, not much of a difference really in terms of improved problem behaviors for telehealth. There is a significant difference in terms of decreased problem behaviors for in-person. So again, probably need more data here. Could be kind of telling. And then social responsiveness is another area that we've been looking at in terms of collecting data. And I should mention, these are all in our clinical groups. These are not research groups. We weren't able to pivot that quickly. We are doing research groups, though, that I'll tell you about for some other interventions, but these are for our clinical groups. And you can see that the in-person was statistically significant in terms of improved social responsiveness. The social responsiveness scale, the SRS, is an autism screening questionnaire that looks at things like social communication, social cognition, so social motivation. And we see a really nice decrease in autism symptoms from pre to post test, even in those who don't have autism. It's used as a tool for just assessing social responsiveness in general. And in-person does quite well. There is a decrease in those symptoms in telehealth. It's not statistically significant. But again, the take home here is that these two outcomes are not statistically significantly different from each other. So again, the outcomes seem to be equivalent. So just kind of giving an overview of these really preliminary findings. And again, this is hot off the presses. There's definitely more data that needs to be collected, but the preliminary findings are showing that telehealth may be an effective delivery model for teaching social skills, at least to youth with ASD and possibly other social challenges. We did see some significant improvements in things like increased social engagement, which is amazing, right? It's a pandemic and they're actually hanging out with their friends more online. And also improved social skills knowledge was significantly improved even in this small study using telehealth. But when you're looking at the comparison between telehealth and in-person, there doesn't really appear to be a significant difference between in-person or telehealth in the areas of things like social engagement, social skills knowledge, overall social skills, even decreased problem behaviors or social responsiveness. They seem to be equivalent. But obviously more research is definitely needed, and we are doing that research. We want to make sure that this is actually an effective treatment tool. The preliminary findings are fine, but we want to actually do more randomized control trials with larger samples and with a more diverse population. So in terms of just resources, thinking about kind of moving forward, what do people have access to? Well, we do have ongoing adolescent telehealth groups. They meet on Wednesdays from 4:30 to 6, and also we have a second group 6:30 to 8. And this is our ongoing slot for just adolescent groups, whether they're in person or telehealth. But our adolescent groups meet on Wednesdays, and right now everything is being done over Zoom. In terms of the young adult program, we also have groups on Mondays for young adults. We have a 4:30 to 6 group and a 6:30 to 8 o'clock group. Again, right now, everything's being offered over Zoom. That's probably not going to change anytime soon. And, you know, for people who can't access our programs, all our programs are offered through the hospital. And so we are able to take insurance, which is nice. Parents often just pay a copay to participate. But we also have a lot of people outside of California, even outside of the US, that also want to learn the skills that we're teaching in peers. And so we have this new option of an educational class. So kind of teaching these skills more in a classroom format. And these are offered on Tuesdays from 4:30 to 6 and 6:30 to 8 for people who maybe are not local or maybe aren't covered under our licenses. We can practice with people even outside of the US with these educational classes. Additionally, we have a virtual boot camp. Some of you might be aware that we were doing in-person boot camps on weekends throughout the year. They were sort of topical boot camps, and those were very successful for a while. And then COVID happened, and that wasn't really safe or possible to do anymore. So again, we tried to pivot quickly, and we created this Peers virtual boot camp. It has 35 episodes. It covers all of the skills that we teach in our adolescent and our young adult program. And it's kind of a go at your own pace program. It's available on a YouTube channel. The access never expires, which is kind of nice. And not only are our families using this, but we've also discovered a lot of professionals have been using this to teach these skills in their, whether it's private practice or even in some group settings. Additionally, I wanted to share with you a really exciting research study that I'm currently doing with Dr. Amanda Goldsrud from the CAN Clinic at UCLA. This is a college to career transition program. It's called Peers for Careers. That's sort of the flagship program of this college to career transition program. It's a study that was funded by Autism Speaks. It's a large randomized controlled trial, and we are enrolling young adults on the autism spectrum in this 20-week program to teach them employment skills, so how to obtain and maintain employment. It also offers the option of internship opportunities at the end of the course, as well as employer support, so training employers to also create supportive environments for adults on the spectrum. And this is a free intervention, again, for adults with ASD. In terms of other interventions, we also have our Peers for Dating randomized control trial. This is a 16-week program that teaches dating skills to adults on the spectrum, also a free intervention. All of these programs are being offered on Zoom pretty successfully. We're really excited about how well all of this is transferred to this online platform. I also wanted to share with you our L-DOPA study. Some of you might be familiar with this study that I'm collaborating on with Dr. Jim McCracken, and this is through CART, the Center for Autism Research and Treatment. This study has been on hold since COVID-19 happened, but we're hoping to resurrect this study, and this is where we're pairing peers, the online intervention, hopefully again in person at some point, but with the drug L-DOPA to see if possibly we could make socialization and social interactions more rewarding and pleasurable for adolescents and adults on the spectrum. Finally, the videos that I showed you in this presentation, I wanted to share that these are all available, as well as many others, online on our website. So if you want to use those in your own practice, there's over 100 role play videos available to anyone publicly, and those are free for you guys to use at your disposal. We also have some other resources I want to share before I wrap up, and we can start opening up to the Q&A. And if you have questions, again, feel free to send them through the Q&A feature on your toolbar. But this is just a book that I wrote called The Science of Making Friends. It's really teaching all the skills that we teach in peers to families that maybe can't access a peers program in their community. We also have manuals, of course, that we published for professionals. This is our parent-assisted teen program. I should mention that we've been doing teleconferences again, really since COVID started. And we have an upcoming conference that's a 3-day certified training seminar over Zoom for professionals and educators. It's in November 4th through the 6th. Again, this is for our parent-assisted teen program. We have another teleconference coming up in April for that same program. We also have a teleconference for our young adult program. We just had one last month, and we're having another in February that's focused on peers for young adults. So again, this is really for professionals and for educators to learn how to implement the peers program either in their practice or in their educational or mental health settings. And then finally, we also have a school-based certified training. We don't know if this is going to be a teleconference or not. It's scheduled for next June. Let's hope it's in person, but we will determine the venue as it gets closer to that June date. But this is for our school-based intervention for adolescents. All right, in closing, I just want to go ahead and thank our amazing team at the UCLA Peers Clinic. We have a number of really dedicated, hardworking research assistants, some really gifted, brilliant research collaborators, and lots of generous funders, really amazing administrative team. And so I feel grateful to be able to represent the program in talks like this, but this really is a huge collaborative effort. Finally, if you have any questions about our program, you can of course visit our website, check out our social media, which is pretty active. And we have a number of resources about our programs that you can find there. So with that, I think I will go ahead and end, and I think we can go ahead and take some questions. And I believe Raina is going to be moderating the Q&A. We're going to stick around for another maybe 10 minutes or so to answer questions.
Yeah, so we probably have time for a few questions, and I know that some people might have to go to their next meeting or engagement. So one of the questions is, what do you see as the future of the Peers program? Do you think that you'll continue doing groups online, or will you return to in-person groups?
You know, I think that we eventually will move to in-person groups again once it's safe to do that. I have a feeling our program will be one of the last to really return in person, because what we're hearing from our families is that they really have very little desire to come to a hospital and be in a group setting with other people. So I think telehealth is definitely going to stick around for a while until it's safe to be in person. And my suspicion is that telehealth isn't going anywhere. Our families are really, really happy with this new venue. In fact, we went from running 5 groups a week every week to we are at 8 groups a week right now and about to be at 10 groups a week. So we are very, very busy. It's been an incredibly busy time. There's definitely a demand and need for this. We also had families that would travel great distances to come to our program at UCLA that don't need to do that now. They can use telehealth. People would relocate from other parts of the world to come to our 16-week programs. They don't need to do that now because we have these educational classes. So I think that telehealth isn't going anywhere. And I think that that's probably true for a lot of our treatment services that we provide at UCLA.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that answer. And we're getting a lot of questions also about sharing the PowerPoint, which I believe you said will be available. And the link to the Google Doc will also be in there. Is that correct?
That's correct. And it's always being updated, so you can always check back.
Okay, great. Another question is thinking about a follow-up to peers. So because there's been so much fantastic feedback about peers, how will you kind of continue to support these gains? And also, in addition to that, can people repeat peers?
Good question. Well, we have done long-term research on our program, at least our adolescent program, 1 to 5 years after treatment in our parent-assisted programs. And we actually saw that the teens were doing just as well, if not better. We attribute that to the parent involvement. I'm not taking credit for it. I'd love to, but I mean, they come to our program for, once a week for 90 minutes for, 16 weeks. It's not a lot of time in the grand scheme of things. But when you train coaches and caregivers to be, or parents to be coaches, social coaches to their kids, the program's never ending. And so that's the power, I think, behind the program is the parent involvement or the caregiver involvement. Having said that, though, we do believe in things like booster sessions and maintenance programs, which is why we developed our boot camps. Now, these boot camps were topical. They would meet quarterly. We had a conversation boot camp, we had a friendship boot camp, we had a dating boot camp. That was always very popular. And also we had a bully proofing boot camp. So all the topics that we covered were in these boot camps. Now, when COVID happened, that obviously wasn't going to be safe to do that, these 2-day kind of intensive weekend boot camps. So we have the virtual boot camp now that people can use. And there is the option of repeating the program. But what we found is that families, when they come to the graduation point, like the last week of the program, they often want to repeat. They say, sign me up again. When can we start again? We really discourage them from doing that. We usually will say, why don't you wait a couple or a few months, see if you really need this. Usually it's their anxiety. They're worried that the gains are going to go away. And we learn this the hard way, like we learn a lot of things, right? We let people sign up right away, and guess what happened? They dropped. because they didn't really need the program. So it is actually rare that people will repeat. Most often they repeat if they did the program as an adolescent and maybe they want to get a little tune-up as an adult and maybe want to learn some of the dating skills, which are only offered in the young adult program. So these are options of every family is a little bit different, but we want to offer these sort of maintenance options and booster sessions if possible.
Fantastic. And one other question, do you have specific resources on how to adapt to delivering peers virtually?
I sure do. I've got over 100 PowerPoint slides that go into this, but what I would really recommend is if you attend one of our teleconferences, and I should mention for our UCLA faculty, we've always, since the beginning of this program, offered those as comped for our UCLA family. If you're working within Semel Institute, you want to just contact us. If you can be present for the 3 days, we actually will provide you with certified training. We do that for our trainees as well, our interns and our postdocs, but also faculty that want to learn about the program. And so that's definitely an option, but that's probably the best way to learn about how to use telehealth. You can contact our clinic, and I'm happy to share those slides with you. Like I said, there's over 100. But the cool thing about doing one of our 3-day intensive certified trainings is that you not only get certified as a peer certified provider, but also as a telehealth provider, because throughout that entire 3 days of training as a teleconference, we teach you in very, very specific ways how to deliver peers via telehealth. If you don't have time for that, just reach out to our clinic and we're happy to share the PowerPoint slides that talk about our telehealth guidelines in more detail.
Fantastic. And I have to put a plug in. I've done both an in-person training and the telehealth trainings, and it's super helpful just going over everything and how to kind of convert all the lessons to a virtual platform.
Thank you for that, Raina. One thing I failed to mention too is that we've converted all of our programs to telehealth and have PowerPoint slides for all of the sessions. So you don't even have to do that. It's basically come to all packaged together, and every session of our 16-week programs has been developed into a PowerPoint presentation with embedded videos and the whole thing. So, you don't have to work too hard on creating a program as long as you have the information and the resources.
Absolutely. Does anyone else have questions before we wrap up? Okay, I'm not seeing any other ones, so I think.
Okay. Well, again, I want to thank Dr. McCracken, Rima, Ernie, Raina. Thank you so much for introducing me and for moderating the Q&A. Thank you all for being here today. And if you do have additional questions, you can feel free to reach out to us at the Peers Clinic, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. But wishing everybody safe and healthy, and we'll see you at the next Grand Rounds. Thank you.